we're focusing on team dynamics and utilizing team dynamics as part of your workforce planning. I wanted to present this in a different way and look at not only from a team dynamic standpoint, but also what does it mean when we look at drive intensities within team dynamics, and how is that going to help inform our decisions around recruiting and selection? So when you leave today's webinar, there are 3 areas that I would hope that you're a little more versed on. Number 1 being drive intensity in the process of recruiting and selection. Number 2 is utilizing team dynamics for workforce planning, but also thinking about team dynamics and drive intensity together. Team dynamics happens to be a wonderful, very useful layout to look at drive intensities in a different way. And that can significantly impact and influence how you're making decisions around your workforce planning. Most important is number 3. I want you to leave this webinar and to be more intentional with your workforce planning, thinking more holistically about your organization, thinking about the future of your organization, and utilizing team dynamics to plan that. And what we're not focused on today, we're not going to focus on looking at team dynamics to determine what positions belong or is most appropriate for any one of those 4 quadrants. That I think would be a little boring. And by the way, when you start using artificial intelligence, you can just ask artificial intelligence. Today, we're going to look at what artificial intelligence probably isn't going to tell you, because we're not only thinking about the jobs that are important within each quadrant, but we're talking about how the intensity plays a significant role in that as well. And why is drive intensity important when it comes to recruiting and selection? It's important because for those of you who are using position profiles, when you're using position profiles, it's based on a position profile template. In this case, I'll use something very simple that's probably going to relate with everybody that's on this call, regardless of the size of your company, or if you're just a one-person business, or if you have 500 to 1,000 people within your business and you're growing at a rapid pace. We're all familiar with the position of sales. And for those of you who've been using Acumax Index for a while now, you understand that there is a difference between what we would refer to as a sales hunter, which is on the shared screen, and a sales farmer. Now, sales hunter that you can see on the screen, this is a common template for that. And let me break it down a little bit more specifically. So when we talk about having a sales hunter position profile, number 1, the A is going to be greater than the B. So when we think about that A-B combination, task over social. So using my cursor on the shared screen, the task, when the A drive is high, it's considered as a task drive. When the B drive is high, it's considered as a social drive. Sales hunters are A greater than B. Sales hunters, the C drive is low. The C drive is low to move quickly, make fast decisions, have that sense of urgency, and to achieve our targets at a rapid pace. And then, of course, the D drive is low. From an A-D relationship, we're looking at A greater than D, which we would refer to as a generalist. So as you can see here, the A drive is greater than the D drive, a generalist profile, which means that outcome is a lot more important than how we get there. Now, when we factor drive intensities, it creates a little bit of a difference in how we think about the profile. And why that's important is because you could have 2 applicants, and these are examples that are on the screen here. You have applicant number 1. They're 100% match, A greater than B, task over social, low C, A greater than D, generalist profile, 100% match. Then you have applicant number 2 is also a 100% match. A greater than B, low C, A greater than D, it's a generalist profile. Now you could argue that there is the other minor difference here is the D drive's a lot lower for applicant 2. Now that could be significant in regards to how they perform in the role. But more importantly, in the context of what we're focusing on today, is the intensities, the difference in intensities of the drive. When I refer to intensities, I'm referring to the letters that are within each drive. You can either have the letter L, which means like, the letter W, which is want, or the letter N, which means need. And I'll go into a lot more detail in a few moments from now when it comes to drive intensity. So when we're not intentionally thinking or have a layout of our current workforce in front of us and utilizing team dynamics to plot those different functions and everybody that's in those functions, it's hard to account for the importance of intensity. So when we look at an example like this, and you could have many other applicants that are comparing to the sales hunter profile or business development, whatever you choose to call it, you might look at this and say, no matter what, it's going to be a great match. And in most cases, it will be. Now, there are some times where you want to deliberately and intentionally, purposefully select that person that carries more intensity, because more intensity is going to be more drive around sales. When somebody has a little more of that tighter profile, less intensity in that profile, like applicant 2, sure, they're still going to be focused on outcomes and targets and have that sense of urgency, but that intensity is going to be a bit more mitigated. Whereas applicant 1 is going to bring more intensity to the role. So how do we factor that in the overall scope of workforce planning? And that's what I want to focus on today, because when we're not being intentional with our recruiting and selection, there are 3 possible outcomes to that aren't always positive. Number 1 being unintended consequences. And what do I mean by unintended consequence? I mean, in what I'm more familiar with in my experiences is we could be following all the rules as it relates to matching applicant to position profile, as it relates to the functions of our organization. And today, during this webinar, I'm going to show you a real example of what that looks like between a quality team and a production team in a manufacturing company. Now, we could be following all the rules, meaning that in production, we really want that high A, low B, low C, high D profile. In quality, we want to see a little more of that lower A, low B, high C, high D profile. Now, when we aren't thinking about this holistically, the unintended consequence is that cross-functional inefficiency that's related to the low B versus low B. You have a production team that's focused on high volume output, low B. They're not going to think proactively about communication. They're just executing on and producing parts. The quality team, they're also not likely to proactively communicate. And that creates issues around when should we stop production? When are we finding defective parts? How do we treat those defective parts so we don't continuously produce scrap as we move forward? So that low B versus low B inefficiency is a common mistake that's often made. We could be following all the rules of position profile matching and still have that unintended consequence. But when you take your workforce and you put them within the team dynamics, you're not only looking at that possible clash and how you can start recruiting around that clash to offset some of the cross-functional inefficiency, but you can also mind the intensities or the gaps between different functions in your organization. Number 2, when we're not thinking about this intentionally, we can often misplace intensity. What do I mean by misplacing intensity? Now, I don't know if any of you on the webinar have go to Subway sandwiches. I do occasionally. But what's interesting about Subway is to go back in time 10, 15 years ago, it's very appealing. The old sandwich artist position, very appealing to higher C profiles. They kind of walk you through that process, and there's a customization there, but there's a process. You go from what kind of bread do you want? Do you want it toasted? Do you want what veggies do you want? What sauces do you want? But it's very much an assembly line of building a sandwich, and you go from beginning to end, and you pay, then you leave. And I think the challenge that they've realized over the last decade or so is, how are we keeping up with other quick service types of restaurants like the McDonald's and the Arby's and the KFCs and the Chick-fil-A's? How are we keeping up with that speed? So what you've noticed in the last 10 years or so is Subway has implemented more of a similar menu to an establishment like that. So to go from this assembly line to, if you just want a number 1, pick the number 1, or if you just want the number 2, pick the number 2 and 3 and so on. The problem is you still have the same intensities around high C assembly line types of profiles. So you go into a Subway and you say, I'll take a number 1. What kind of bread do you want that on? What veggies do you want that on? And then you end up sticking around with the same amount of time answering the same exact questions as you were if if you were ordering it the old way. So sometimes that misplaced intensity is, as you change your organization or change your model, you have to consider what happens to the intensities as well. Because the people that I have in a job, they're still high C. So I need to start looking for lower C profiles to align with our overall change in direction. We have to think about those misplaced intensities. Number 3 is, at times where we're not intentional with how we are going about workforce planning, we do run the risk of being off balance. And what do I mean by off balance? And I see this a lot in technical based organizations. There are a lot of higher D profiles. And when we have a higher volume of any particular drive, that begins to dictate the tonality of culture. So when you have so many high Ds in an organization, you become off balance and you start to pick up on this tonality of conventionality, meaning that you don't have as much ideation, you don't have as much creativity, and instead there's a little more caution. Maybe at times I feel like I'm walking on eggshells as well in the higher D environment. That's not always a bad thing, and sometimes that within itself is intentional because of the type of industry that we're in. But when we're not thinking about it holistically, we're not being intentional with developing our workforce, what that does is it creates an issue where we become a little too heavy in one particular drive. So then we have to start thinking about adding a little more diversity in other functions of the organizations to offset that and to create a little more balance. But by then, unfortunately, it might be too late. And where does all of this start? It starts with drive intensity, as I mentioned earlier. So not only in the aspects of team dynamics and looking at how your workforce is plotted today, but also starting with this idea of drive intensity. As I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure for those of you who've sat through training, hopefully everybody on the webinar sat through training, there's always opportunity for additional training. Please reach out to us if you want to do that. Now, drive intensity consists of 3 possible letters within each drive. And this is based on the sigma strengths of intensity, the little hash marks when you look at an AccuMax index output. Now, the letter L is like. I like to have. W is want, I want to have, and then need is I need to have. Now let's look at this within the scope of an AccuMax index profile. The example that's on the shared screen is a low A within the like, the B drive is highest within the want, the C drive is lowest within the need, and the D drive is high within the want. So low A, highest B, lowest C, high D. But when you start considering intensities, everything changes based on how those drives are actually displayed. I look at drive intensity as the single most important part of profiling. And why do I say that? I say that it's the most important part of profiling because it tells us 2 different things about an individual. It's going to tell us how theatric or how dramatic we are with displaying that particular drive. But it's also going to create situations where if we're not getting what we want or need, how hard is it to deal with the emotions that come with that? So there you could start thinking about its relation to emotional intelligence, of emotional self-awareness, emotional self-management, and that type of thing. I like to think about this tone, tolerance, and adaptability. And what do I mean by that? When you look at the like drive, low A within the like range, anytime you have a drive that's within the like range, that drive is going to carry a higher amount of tolerance and more adaptability. What do I mean by that? A low A profile wants to be included. They want to feel part of a team. And if you're making a decision, if you're a manager and you have a team of low A profiles, and one of your low A profiles are stuck in traffic or they're delayed with coming in, and you have to make a decision with your team, it's important, as you know, with low A's to discuss why that decision's being made, look for input, discuss different options, weigh the pros and cons of those options. But that low A within the like range, they could be stuck in traffic. Now, when they show up to work, you go to that individual and you say, I'm sorry, we had to make the decision without you. You were stuck in traffic, but let's cover what we discussed. Now, I like to feel involved as a low A profile. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. So I have higher tolerance there within low A like. So as much as I like to be involved, it's okay that you didn't involve me. So there's also a little more adaptability there as well. So that drive is essentially a little more muted as it relates to how you motivate that profile. Now, when you start thinking about the want and the need drives, it changes everything. With want level of drives, there's less adaptability and less tolerance. So that person, if they were a low A, stuck in traffic in the want range, then what you get is you get a little bit more of a visceral experience with how they relate to that, or the assumptions that they make and why they weren't involved, or why you didn't wait for them to get out of traffic to get to work on time. When you start thinking about need, that's just a heightened level, and as you can see with the C drive, lowest C within the need range, that's also becomes a little unconscious. And that's where these unconscious impulses happen, where we have almost virtually no control over what we experience and then how we behave in response to that. So that time between impulse and behavior happens instantaneously, which leaves very little time for us to control. And that applies to the A drive, the B drive, the C drive, and the D drive. So you can imagine if you have a highest A in the need and a lowest C in the need, for example, and I'll show you some examples later in this presentation, that's obviously going to carry quite a bit of impulsive behavior when it comes to driving for results without necessarily checking in with others would be an example of that. So again, if you were to look at or reference the first slide, you could be looking at the same exact profile pattern, 100% matched to the position profile, and the mistake would be to not consider the difference in intensities. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to think about that in the scope of our overall strategy as an organization. Where do we need more intensity versus where don't we need more intensity, so we're not in a situation where we have that misplaced intensity or the unintended consequence that's going to cause that push and pull when it comes to intensity. Now, here's an example as we get a little closer to utilizing team dynamics, but still staying within this idea of drive intensity. An example is what I mentioned before. You have this production team. This production team is highest A within a need. So this is a group index. So you're taking multiple people within a production team, you're combining them together, and this is the statistical aggregate of all of those individuals put together. So in this situation, you have the production team, highest A in the need, low B in the want, lowest C in the want, and the D drive is high within a like range. 75% of the profile, not only does it carry intensity in the want or need, but it's also 100% of the profile is very task driven. Now, this team is purely focused on high volume output targets. You also have the quality team. The quality team is the opposite, as you can see from the production team. They're focused on preventative maintenance and reduction in scrap. And how they do that is really the essence of the challenge. They do that by depending on when a defective part is noticed, how fast can they take that, analyze that, and then stop production so no more parts are being produced. What does that require? Number one, it requires somebody to first identify there's a defective part. Number two, it requires some sort of engagement. They have to be involved. We expect that more, or it comes a little more naturally from high B profiles. Now, the question is, well, why wouldn't we just have a lot of high Bs in quality? Sure, that's an option, but you're going to find less of that when you start recruiting and selecting. You're going to find more of the position of the profiles that you see on the screen here in quality. So how do we work around that? How do we consider intensity in this process of how we select, or how we mitigate the challenges that are resulting from this problem? That's where we want to use team dynamics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the next slide here and explain the team dynamics model, and then I'm going to go into the web application and show you how to produce the team dynamics if you haven't done so already. If you have, wonderful. In fact, I have a question at the end of the presentation where I'm interested in hearing from you and how you've utilized team dynamics in your workforce planning or recruiting and selection in general. Now, when we look at the team dynamics, it's broken into 4 quadrants. Those 4 quadrants are based on the BD relationship and the AC relationship. Now, before team dynamics, the typologies that we really focused on is the A-B combination, as I referred to earlier, as the sales profiles. You can either have A greater than B or B greater than A. Or we would look at the AD relationships, specialist versus generalist. So this is just a different way of looking at the AccuMax Index profile and thinking about it and how it's plotted, or how these profiles are plotted across all 4 of these quadrants. Now, the y-axis is looking at the BD relationship. So what does that mean? For example, in the lower left-hand quadrant, we refer to this quadrant as sustainability. Why do we refer to it as sustainability? Is because within this quadrant, you're going to find that the C drive is greater than the A drive and the D drive is greater than the B drive. So essentially, that's where you have that quality profile that we looked at on the screen previous to this. But when you look at it from the y-axis, it's going to be that BD relationship, meaning that D drive will be greater than the B drive when it's within sustainability. As you increase from bottom up, then you get into that social awareness where that B drive is going to be greater than the D drive. Now, when you look at the x-axis, we're talking about the AC relationship. So in the bottom left-hand quadrant of sustainability, that C drive is going to be greater than the A, but as you move to the right of the graph, you're going to find that A starts to increase higher than the C drive. That becomes the AC value, but again, you also have the BD relationship. So the upper right-hand quadrant, that B is going to be greater than the D, the A is going to be greater than the C drive. So that's where you get kind of the more salesy profile. And there's that push and pull or tug of war between growth and sustainability. Or the example that I'm going to show you, there's also somewhat of a gap and a negative consequence associated to the intensities between enactment and sustainability. So again, when you look at the upper right-hand quadrant of growth, you're going to find that those profiles, you're going to have A greater than C. You're going to have the B drive is going to be greater than the D drive. And social awareness, you're going to have a lot of those drives that are going to be very social. So you're going to have a lot of that low A, high B, high C, and low D, 100% social profile. And then enactment in the bottom right-hand quadrant, you're going to have profiles that are very task-driven. These profiles are high A, low B, low C, high D. Give me a goal, give me a task. Let me just be a little more transactional with how I go about doing my work. I'm not interested in seeking input or going around and having conversations. I just want to really focus on my outcome and put out fires. So let me go into what I'll do now is I will go into the application. So this is what I'm using a demo, my demo site here, this web application within the AccuMax Index web application. Now, when you're building a team dynamics, you're just going to select everyone that you want part of the team dynamics. So I'm going to select this, the radio button here. That's going to select all of them. So so it's 8 of 8. I'm going to go to group actions. Anytime you select more than one individual, you get the group actions modal. Click group actions. And anytime you click actions or group actions, it triggers a toolbox. And in that toolbox, there's a variety of other options that you can utilize. Now, it's always going to default on the index tab. Within the index tab, you have the option of team dynamics. So I'm going to click on team dynamics. Now, actually, before I do that, notice to the right, I can exclude individuals and only invite the ones within the team dynamics that I've selected. So after you've done that, you've confirmed who you've included. You're going to select team dynamics, and it will always default on the tab that I just presented to you from the PowerPoint presentation that will provide a little bit of an explanation behind how to read the graph. The second tab, you have your results. So by taking all 8 of those individuals, now you're looking at the team dynamics report, and everybody that you selected then becomes this colorful block or circle within that's plotted across all 4 quadrants based on the values that are being measured. Again, the DB relationship and the AC relationship. Using the example on the slide that's not at all related to the production versus quality story, but this is just showing you how to use it within the application. You want to focus on the average. The red dot in this case is the average, and it's within the growth quadrant. Now, that average is going to not only be based on the volume, but it's also going to be based on the intensities of the profiles. That's why at times you might have only 1 or 2 people in one particular quadrant versus 5 in another quadrant, but those 2 carry more intensity in the profile, which is then going to pull that average closer to where they are. Look at the average, but also as you click on these buttons, you'll notice So for example, if I click on Charles, that's the blue dot, Charles disappears, and then there's a subset average, but I can bring Charles back in to help me just do a variety of different analytics based on, well, what would this team look like if I removed somebody, or I can go back and I can include them into the team dynamics as well. So that is just a very quick tutorial on how to produce, how to include everybody in a team dynamics, and also how to create a team dynamics report. Now, within team dynamics, you also have a standard report. Again, please be prepared. We're very excited about this. We will have the Ask AI function that can be used on team dynamics. So we will talk more about that in our next webinar, just to kind of go over where is it, what types of questions can you ask, what types of questions do we recommend, and the sky is really the limit when it comes to that. And all very actionable as well, and relevant for you and your business and your industry, which is always unique with artificial intelligence. But this is what the report looks like now, and you absolutely can still find value in using this. It's always going to start with where that average is. Within the growth quadrant, it's the primary natural tendency. All right, so let me get out of this and go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Now, when you look at the production and quality teams, as you can see, because of the intensities on the production team, that average is pulled closer, not closer, it is within the enactment quadrant. So that average is within the enactment quadrant. Whereas the quality team, there's 4 individuals in a quality team, but look at the gap. Look at the gap between quality and production. Now, a lot of that gap is driven by the A drive and the B drive. You have a lot of lowest Bs within quality. You have a lot of lowest Bs within production. Now, how do you factor drive intensity and kind of this overall idea of utilizing team dynamics for workforce planning? If you were not sitting on this webinar today, the instinct would be, maybe we just need to hire another person in quality. Maybe if we just keep loading up the quality quadrant, the quality department, maybe that will create more preventative measures around production's natural tendency and conscious tendency to drive for more production, regardless of the defects that are being noticed in parts. So next thing you know, you're in the millions in scrap, and you have the quality team now double the size, more overhead, and then you're costing the organization more in scrap. So you're not solving the problem. We also we could change the job description, and we could hope and pray that we get somebody in quality that has a very similar profile to somebody in production. The probability of that may not always be within our favor. So the question becomes is, how do we close that gap? It's going to be easier to find somebody in quality. Notice the inclusion of the blue dot. It's going to be easier to find somebody, an applicant, that has that quality background, that has the quality Acumax index 100% match to the quality position profile. The difference, however, less intensity, closer to the enactment quadrant, closer to the production type of tendencies, without giving in too far to the production intensities, because we don't want that outcome either. What we want is we want less intensity around quality, somebody that's going to be more likely to engage with production, but still has that quality background. And it closes the gap. In fact, it closes the gap so much that it brings that average a little more centered, but a little closer to sustainability. This is going to result in significant cost savings when it comes to the level of scrap that's produced. Now, keep in mind, if you are utilizing team dynamics this way for your workforce planning, and you're filling that gap, closing that gap, you're still having to depend on this individual to cross that aisle to stop production when it's needed. But I can guarantee that this person in blue is more likely to do that than these 4 individuals over here. Doesn't make these 4 individuals any less than. They're still quality, they're still focused and doing a good job, but this person is going to be more likely to engage proactively with those to the right in production. So that's one way of thinking about drive intensities and team dynamics and how you can look at this and think of your organization a little more holistically. And even though you can have applicants that are all a great match to that position profile of quality, you may want to focus on the one that carries less intensity or more intensity, depending on what your overall objective is. Let's think of something a little more, I think, common, right? Going back to this topic of sales, I think that's probably going to be a little more common for everybody that's on the webinar in a couple of ways. Number one, you could be, again, an organization of one person, 1 to 5, and I would dislike for you to think that this isn't relevant to you because the smaller size of your organization. I would argue that intensity in that sense is going to actually be felt more, right? So it's going to be felt more in the sense that if you are a group of a business of 5 individuals and you hire what you see on the screen here, business development that carries this much intensity, you're going to feel that a lot more than a group of 500 people, right? So intensity, the idea of intensity and how that appears and how that's actionable within team dynamics, I would argue applies more to a smaller organization than one that's, a lot larger. So because of what intensity does, remember, more theatric when it comes to how that drive is displayed. Now, here is an example that's probably easier to relate with for those of you who are not in the manufacturing industry. Now, here you have, again, 2 individuals combined into a business development profile. This, again, would be a 100% match to that sales hunter. Their job is to generate new business. Then you have a warehouse team. This warehouse team, they're responsible for managing inventory and the shipping and receiving. Now, I realize I'm oversimplifying for the sake of time, but this gives you an idea. You have business development, then you also have the warehouse team. Now, what does this look like when we look at the team dynamics? When we look at the team dynamics, you might not even notice the drives that are very far, almost outside of the chart. These are the 2 individuals that are in the business development role. Now, this gap is significant between business development and it's just 2 people. Those 2 people have enough intensity that it's pulling the average closer to center. Then you have this warehouse team that's responsible for inventory. The issue in this situation that for those of you that have this type of makeup, if you haven't experienced it, you will, is the sales hunters, business development, that tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. That generalist profile, that unconscious, impulsive behavior to commit, and we may commit to products, solutions that we don't currently have in stock. Now, if you have a strong technical solution to that can help accuracy and more confidence in inventory, sure, that can help close the gap. But usually if you're dealing with business development that carries this level of intensity, there's a lot of opportunity for revenue, right? And at the end of the day, we make it happen, right? You make it happen. So the message here isn't to say these 2 individuals in business development are not the right people. So that's not at all the message. They're going to be your workhorses, thoroughbred sales centers that are generating revenue. Sure, it's going to be painful from a warehouse perspective, but the team comes together and they make it happen. The question then becomes is how do we alleviate that? How do we alleviate the stress and the frustration of working the 8 additional hours to make sure we're producing enough so when those 2 individuals sell that product, we have it in stock? How do we alleviate that stress and that frustration? And then also the infighting, because the infighting is also that other unintended consequence that creates that inefficiency. Now, we might look at this and surely we wouldn't look at this and think, maybe we need more people in warehouse or in inventory. Usually the next common thought is, well, what about project management, right? And the issue here is if you do bring in somebody in project management, and there's a couple of different 2 or 3 variations of project management position profiles that I've seen, but this would be probably more of a common one because of that C drive being low. The issue here is if you bring in a project manager profile, it's probably not going to solve the problem. You're going to have a lot more visibility around projects and process, but you're still dealing with a situation where business development is just moving at a much faster pace, and they're making decisions without necessarily checking the accuracy of inventory. And a project manager, they're going to provide a lot of documentation. They're going to try their best to hold business development accountable to that, but it's probably not going to work, right? So the question then becomes is, where are we more sparse? If we think about how robust of a sales team that we need in our organization, where are we sparse? And when we think of sales, sometimes we get into the bad habit of only thinking of sales hunters, the two that are on the screen here, far up upper right-hand quadrant of growth. That is a bad habit we get into. But sales is a lot more robust. It's a lot more diverse, meaning that we may think instead, is it the better option to hire or to expand our sales team and to create a customer success account management position? And it can be just one person. And because it's in that social awareness quadrant, you're going to find that, again, that A drive is low, the B drive is greater than the D drive, the C drive's high, and the D drive's high. It's more specialist profile. Now, that's going to then create the opportunity to separate sales responsibilities. Business development, you focus on these high target leads, whereas customer success, you're just focused on these areas. And customer success is also going to put a lot more effort into following CRMs, making sure that product is available before it's being sold, and more importantly, ensuring that renewals are happening year after year. So going to those same customers, getting them to buy the same products time and time again. So there, not only are you getting the revenue and the cash flow from business development, but then you also have customer success that's going to help with your profitability over a longer period of time. And it's going to take some of the pressure off inventory because you've separated those sales responsibilities. So business development's not focused on everything anymore. You've shifted some of that over to customer success. That's going to alleviate some of that pain that the inventory and the warehouse team is experiencing. And then as you find more process, maybe then project management can be a necessary position that could help that. But when we think of sales, again, when you look at business development, this is the profile for business development, focused on outdoing prior performance, driven to meet aggressive goals, can be unconventional in how they meet those goals, whereas sales farmer profiles, again, within that social awareness quadrant, they're a little more focused on longer term, more knowledgeable, more intimate with the customer experience and the products, but also their overall sentiment and satisfaction with what we provide. And they do a really good job with having this cadence of, I'm going to check in with you every 30 days, every 90 days, every 120 days. So if you're looking at team dynamics, you're thinking holistically, what's going to give me the most value, right? And in this sense, we're going to look at it. We need more customer success, more than we need business development. So those were a couple of different examples, not only looking at team dynamics and how we can utilize team dynamics for workforce planning to make better, more informed decisions, so we don't experience those unintended consequences, misplaced intensity, or being off balance. Also considering how we can factor in this idea of drive intensity, stay within the same quadrant, but closer to another area such as enactment or growth, so we can kind of live in both worlds. And I think that there's a multitude of other implications there as it relates to getting teams to work more effectively together as well. So it's not only a use for hiring, but it's a use to create stronger collaboration within the team. With that said, I have 3 questions for you. Now, unfortunately, you are on mute. So I would please ask that you take some time to think about these 3 questions and just please use the chat feature to answer them. If there's a question or a response that you want to give that's not aligned with any of these 3 questions, that's fine too. But question number 1, how have you used Team Dynamics to support your recruiting and selection strategy for those of you who have used Team Dynamics already? What about this idea of intensity, right? Most likely we haven't really thought about that as I've presented it during today's webinar. Where do you need more or less intensity based on what you know about your team members today? Last question, based on today's webinar, how do you plan to use Team Dynamics for your workforce planning? And certainly drive intensity as well. So any one of these 3 questions, take some time to think about, and I will stop talking and just wait to see if anybody wants to answer one of these 3 questions. Remember, your answer is not only the purpose isn't to make sure that you followed the webinar, but it's also to be very helpful to your peers and colleagues that are on the webinar as well. So thank you, Raquel. So the diversification of the organization. Yes, exactly. And that gets to that idea of, at times where we're not being intentional with workforce planning, we do run the risk of being off balance. The example with that higher D, I see that a lot. And in fact, not only is that culture conventional, but if you've been in my trainings, you'll hear me talk about this, but it's also very Shakespearean. Nobody's communicating. Everybody's just assuming, because that's what happens from a high D perspective. So diversify. Look at that and say, geez, we could really need some more folks in social awareness to help communicate and provide more transparency. Leadership meetings, how can we cascade that message down? Those in social awareness will be good at doing that. Yes. It's thinking differently about sales hunters and sales farmers. Sales and social awareness, from Raquel's point, also adding into social awareness on the sales side, absolutely. You're going to notice a big difference with that. These are people who are really caring about long-term account management, or just going through a list of leads and calling on those leads or prospects. Whereas business development, they're attacking, right? They're on attack mode. Okay. So I'm not sure who wrote this. Oh, sorry. So Cece, thank you so much. I am going to use the team dynamics mapping when I do an intake meeting to show the current team and where there are gaps, the type of candidate that would fill that gap. Yes, and that is the kind of the newer way of thinking about intensity and team dynamics, is having it ready to look at right when you have your list of applicants, which ones are a match to the position profile, and then on top of that, where would they be plotted within the team dynamics, in alignment with everyone else that you currently have within the business. That will help you make a more informed decision. Thank you, Cece. The awareness of gaps as well. I mean, that just within itself, it's a useful diagnostic, because it'll create that aha moment where you're looking at that gap, look at that gap between, where my team is in sustainability versus where they are in enactment. It's like, now I know why they're not communicating, right? It's not that they don't like each other. It's just nobody has that proactive drive of communication. And on top of that, there's so much intensity that's unconscious. We're just not even thinking about it. Whereas if you cover that gap with somebody less unconscious, higher tolerance, higher adaptability. Any other uses currently of team dynamics, or how you plan to use this moving forward? I realize some of you probably want to take some time to think about this as well. One more minute, I'll pause, and then we will wrap this up. Okay. With that, I will continue to pause as you think about this, or as you leave the webinar. Please know that we are always there to support you. If you feel that the overview of team dynamics was not sufficient enough today, we are happy to do this over a one-to-one virtual call, and we can certainly do that. Look at your people data within the team dynamics. So we are always there to support you with that as well. But with that said, I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Please look forward to the next webinar that will be focused on the artificial intelligence features that we have embedded within the application. I'm excited about that. I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great remainder of your day.